Hi everyone, this is Diamonté Brown, President of the Baltimore Teachers Union, and
Jocelyn, Providence.
Jocelyn and I are here today to lay out the framework for the proposed changes to the instructional framework rubric that the district is proposing to implement in school year 2020-2021. That means that this school year, 2019-2020, these proposed changes will not, I repeat, will not be used to evaluate you. However, we do want you to know that these proposed changes will or may have an impact on how we're evaluated for school year 2020-2021. Before Jocelyn and I lay out the framework for the instructional framework rubric changes, we want to give a disclaimer. We want our members to know that as BTU representatives, we are advocating that the instructional framework rubric is used as a coaching model and not used as a high-stakes evaluative tool. Currently, the instructional framework rubric is used to determine teacher pay and sometimes even if a teacher keeps or loses their job. With that said, we also understand that this is the tool that that is used to evaluate teachers. And because this is the tool we currently use, that we need to be a part of how it's implemented and what it looks like. So the first thing that we want to review is the district's intent for these proposed changes. So the district wants to align the rubric with expectations in current standards and curriculum. BCPSS also considers these changes a response to stakeholder feedback about current instructional framework rubric 2.0. Thirdly, the district thinks that these proposed changes will support continuous improvement and reflection on instructional practice. And lastly, the intent per the district is to prioritize evidence-based teaching decisions which influence student learning. As Jocelyn and I go through the intent and the goals, make certain that you're looking at the bottom for a link to the instructional framework rubric so that you can take a look for yourself.
Thank you, President Brown. Yes, so below we have a link for the current instructional framework, for the most updated proposed instructional framework, and then we also have a quick link below for a survey that we're going to talk a little bit more about later, okay? And so now I'm going to do some framing of the goals that the district has for these proposed changes, okay? And so the first one is to designed to support coaching and reflection, right? That's the purpose of this. That's the goal, it's designed to support the coaching and reflection. And it's also connected to curriculum expectations and district blueprint. That's the district's goal, okay? Also, another goal is that more student actions throughout the rating descriptors, right? That's another goal that the district has for this proposed change. And then also to have a streamlined document to prioritize high impact key actions and prepare, teach, and reflect and adjust, okay? So very, very important to note. These are Baltimore City Public Schools' intent and their goals. So if you think that based on the proposed instructional framework that you can look at below in the link, if you think that that's not being shown, please share your feedback. It's very important that your voice is heard to the district and to BTU Executive Board, because we represent the members and we want to make sure that we are including all of your voices and opinions and feedback in this conversation, okay? And so as we're thinking about how we should look through the changes between the current instructional framework and the proposed new one, we're going to do a little deep dive, okay? And so what we're going to look at is two sections of the current instructional framework, right? So T9 of the current instructional framework, and then we're going to compare it to the new proposed instructional framework of T7, because both of those are related. And so for the current, instructional framework, T9 is reinforce positive behavior, redirect off-task behavior, and de-escalate challenging behavior. For the new proposed instructional framework, T7 is the most correlated, and it's titled Engage Students in Social Emotional Practices to Support Positive Behavior. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pause for about 5 seconds, and you can go below and click the two links to open up the current instructional framework and then also the proposed instructional framework if you would like to follow along about some current feedback that I am going to talk about. All right, so hopefully by now you either pause the video, you open up the link, or maybe you just want to kind of listen to what we're going to say. But I also want to be very clear is that this is Jocelyn Providence's feedback. This is not feedback representative of the entire membership necessarily. This is my personal feedback just to kind of spark us to thinking about in your classroom, what do you see is happening? Do you think this would be supportive of both you as a teacher and then also for your students, okay? So first, starting off with looking at the current T9. So one thing that I want to point out is that to be highly effective, it says that there needs to be rare or no off-task behavior, but it does have a little footnote that for students who have like a behavior interventional plan that looks a little bit different. So that's how the current instructional framework is for highly effective for T9. And so for the proposed T7 for highly effective, in my opinion, I think it's an improvement because now we're focusing on, like it says, an improvement because focus on positive rapport and mutual respect. Okay. And so that's why I think that's an improvement, because we're going from just rare and off-task behavior to now thinking about what's the relationship between teachers and students in the classroom and thinking about positive rapport. Next, when we're thinking again about the current instructional framework, when we're thinking about an effective teacher, a 3, it says that the teacher appropriately addresses, redirects, or de-escalates student misbehavior or disruption in a manner that solves the issue. So my key thing that I'm thinking about there is appropriately, like that's very relative. And then also in the current instructional framework for T9, it says, when needed, teacher addresses behavioral issues with minimal interruption to instructional time. Okay. And so again, I'm thinking about what does minimal mean? Because in a classroom, depending on the school and depending on the population of students, minimal interruption can be very different, right? And then also minimal can, in a 45-minute class, is going to be different than in a 70-minute class. And so how is that taken into account when thinking about all of that? And so in the new proposed instructional framework for T7 under effective 3, it says, when needed, teacher appropriately addresses, redirects, or de-escalates student misbehavior or disruption in a manner that solves the issue with minimal disruption. So again, we're talking about that appropriately and minimal that isn't very clear. There is a footnote for de-escalates, right? That's footnote 37, but appropriately and minimal is still very relative and not clear.
And I just want to give an example of what Jocelyn means by appropriate being unclear. The word appropriate can be a subjective term, especially based on what background you come from. So I'll use myself as an example, Diamonté Brown. And once again, as Jocelyn said, this is my opinion, Diamonté Brown's opinion, based on my experience as a teacher. And if you have other opinions or you think Jocelyn and I are totally off target, please let us know, because we need to have a healthy discourse about how we're evaluated and how we hold ourselves accountable as effective teachers.
Yes.
But here's my example about how appropriate can be subjective. So, let's say I have a student in my classroom and I've directed them to sit down nicely about 20 times. And what that looks like is, Hey, Thomas, can you take a seat? Thomas, I need you to take a seat, please. Hey, Thomas, I've asked you nicely to take a seat. Is there anything that you need in order for you to follow my directives? Okay, 20th time, Miss Brown. And just to tell you what my background is, I am from Baltimore. And I was born and raised here, and I attended Baltimore City Public Schools. So I have a luxury of having a relevancy to my students that some teachers don't have. So on my 20th time, I'm going to say, Thomas, I said sit down. Or, Tom, didn't I ask you to sit down? And so you see how not only did my words choice change, my body language change, my tone changed, and my facial expressions changed. Now, from my perspective, that switch was totally appropriate because since I know my students will understand the difference between, okay, Ms. Brown has asked me nicely to sit down, and now I'm taking advantage of the situation, and now she had to be more firm and say it in a different way, and now I'm going to take her more seriously because now Ms. Brown is not playing. That is what we mean by the word appropriate being subjective, because depending on the background that the qualified observer comes from, it's going to dictate if the observer sees that redirection as appropriate or inappropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even going off of that, thinking about what does we want to make sure our qualified observer understands what appropriate means, but then also what about the student? The student is the active participant in that situation. So if the student feels like the situation or issue was addressed in an appropriate manner, that's what matters, right? Because the student is the one who's actively a part of it, not necessarily the qualified observer. And so thinking about the student's role in figuring out if something is or is not appropriate, because the student will let you know if they think something's inappropriate, right? Mm-hmm. So including that into the conversation, okay? Mm-hmm. And then so the last thing I wanted to compare in our deep dive, so for our current instructional framework for T9, thinking about like the developing section, it says redirects or de-escalates student misbehavior or disruption in a manner that does not fully solve the issue. And so again, fully. What does fully mean when solving that issue? I think that's something to think about. Because fully solving the issue for a high school student versus a elementary school student is very different, right? And so does fully mean that, okay, like I have the student sitting in a different area after an incident and they're writing a reflection, or fully means the student is still kind of mumbling under their breath because they're still a little heated about it, right? So what does that look like in different classrooms, and really being intentional about making sure the qualified observer knows that, and then also the teacher knows that. And then for our new proposed instructional framework for T7 in the developing section, it says teachers sometimes engages students in self-reflection that increases self-awareness, right? So now we have some new words and new phrases that we're throwing in, right? They're not necessarily bad phrases, but they're not defined, right? Self-reflection isn't necessarily defined. And then how are we making sure as teachers are trained in what we think is effective self-reflection? Because again, that's something that's age appropriate. That's also something that's content appropriate, right? Mm-hmm. And then thinking about what is that relationship between self-reflection and the curriculum, right? Because if the district is talking about that, one of their intent is to make sure that they're aligning appropriately to standards and curriculum, what curriculums already include that self-reflection, and then what curriculums don't have that. So we need to make sure that teachers are prepared to instill that into their classroom when necessary, and what is the frequency of that. So those are some of the key things that when I'm thinking out loud, processing about how I'm looking at and comparing our current instructional framework to this proposed instructional framework of whether I think, Jocelyn Providence thinks, it's meeting the intent and the goals that the district is saying, okay? So again, that's how we really encourage, like President Brown was saying, if you agree with that feedback, if you disagree with that feedback, please share it, because your voice matters, your opinion matters, and you play a role in deciding what instructional framework we're going to be using for the 2020-2021 school year.
And so we're going to continue to keep you informed, and we want you to stay engaged. And we're going to do that by continuing to upload these info videos. We're also going to host close read sessions, and we're going to continue ongoing communications with updates. And also, we want you to actively participate in what these updates look like. And so, ways you can actively participate are to attend a feedback session. There's actually one coming up that'll be hosted by the district on Wednesday, July 24th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at North Avenue. You can also email Jessica Papia whatever your concerns are, input, feedback about the updates. And we would encourage you to create a BTU working group. If you're interested in creating a BTU working group, you can reach out to me directly at dbrown@baltu.org. Or you can just comment in the comment section and say, hey, I'm interested in a working group. What does a working group look like? What will we do? And what we're suggesting is that this working group would do things like monitor implementation, monitor updates, encourage members to attend and be more engaged in what these updates look like. So stay tuned for another info video on more proposed updates to the Instructional Framework Rubric for school year 2020-2021. Have a great summer.
Bye.